Hi everybody, I'm Bence Komloshi. I'm going to be the host tonight. I'm co-founder of the Architecture for Refugees and Architecture for Refugees Schweiz, two organizations based in Switzerland. And tonight we will have Emilio Brando as a guest. And before we invite him to be live here with us, I would like to have a few slides and a very few seconds, minutes about the whole topic. So the discussions on a weekly basis is about architecture as a human right. I'm zooming in a few seconds. Yeah, architecture is a human right. That's what we state. We started this movement in collaboration with two other organizations, Emergency Architecture and Human Rights, one of them, and the other one is the worldarchitects. So we dedicated our energy and resources to start talking about architecture and about human rights and to bring them together. So we state that architecture is or should be a human right. Hi Emilio, I will add you in a few seconds. So yeah, on the page of the worldarchitects you can find the manifesto written mostly by the Emergency Architecture and Human Rights. It states what is the current state, what do we think about architecture as a human right. You can read a lot of things about it, you can read a little bit of history. And if you have any thoughts, anything to add, please don't hesitate to contact us, to reach out on our platforms and to tell your own opinion, to write something, to give a video, to whatever, with any toolkits that you believe would be useful. So Emilio Brando is our guest tonight. Let's say he's a very interesting guy, I would say. He's a DJ in one hand, so he's doing DJ sessions. He launched the Lunch Beat in Göteborg, and I guess it's already in other cities as well. Maybe not, maybe yes. He will talk more about it, maybe. And this is a slide about this funky lunch party. And he also organizer and educator in Göteborg at the university. So he's an architect, he's an educator. He talks about sustainability and architecture. He deals with home and public spaces. You can find on his YouTube channel a short video about one of his programs, one of his projects, Domesticity in Public Spaces, where they developed interesting home artifacts or something like that with students. And yeah, so this is going to be the thing. He will talk much more about this. I would like to, I know that it's backwards, sorry, this is the thing with the Facebook Live. So please check out our previous episodes. This is already the third, or let's say second episode. The 0 episode was just a kickoff. I talked more about this whole movement. And the first one was with Cyril Hanapé, a French architect. So you can find it already on our YouTube channel. And this current episode you are going to see right now, and it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel in maybe tomorrow or something like that. We also have a Facebook channel, Architecture for Refugees, an Instagram, a YouTube, so don't hesitate to follow us, or please do follow us. If you have any questions during this half an hour, this live, you can share, you can text this comment in comments. You can have your questions, and we will try to give answers. Hopefully during the discussion during this live, but if not, we will try to give some comments after the half an hour live. And see you on the next week. We still don't know who is going to be our next week's guest, but I'm quite sure that someone very, very interesting. Yeah, so Emilio is already here. I'm adding him, and if you have any questions, please get ready, and please follow us. Please text anything. Hello, Emilio. Hi.
Hi. How are you doing?
Fine,
Do you hear me
thanks.
well?
Yeah, it's perfect, I think. Yeah,
Okay,
totally.
good.
Super.
I'm in a telephone room. Yeah, so I think the acoustic should be good.
Yeah, it's really nice. Okay,
Yeah.
so thank you very much that you are here, and I just told a very few words about you, but I'm not even sure if it's really the truth or if it's half truth or whatever. But in this
Yeah.
half an hour, I would like to invite you to talk about your work and somehow connect it or not connect it, but somehow in this like bigger context of architecture as a human right, and what does it mean for you? How do you see this in your work, and so on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
So
I
no
can,
questions, just
yeah,
go on.
I can start
Yeah.
a little short presentation. So my name is Emilio, as you mentioned, and I'm originally from Portugal, from Porto. That's where I was educated as an architect in the school of Porto for, I don't know, for almost 15 years ago. That was about the time when I did an exchange year as an Erasmus student here in Gothenburg at Chalmers. Eventually finishing my education and working at Chalmers being a student at Chalmers made me very interested about sustainability in general in architecture and planning. And therefore I also wrote my thesis on the subject at that time. It was pretty fresh and new things for me. And then later, so 5 years ago, more or less, I came back to Chalmers and to start working here. It's also interesting to add to my background is also that I was born in Mozambique, in Maputo. And the fact that my parents were involved in a lot of moments of struggle and recovery of Mozambique after a colonial period, and has a kind of a personal history that affects a lot how I perceive or how I become interested about certain subjects in architecture. I also started as a DJ. What you mentioned, I started DJing also about, I think, 16, 17 years ago, so even earlier, or maybe even longer. I don't know. I haven't counted the time. But it's what has I think happened is that for the last 10 years I've been a lot engaged in a lot of social activities and how do you say, voluntary work or kind of citizen engagement in a way. And this, I think, makes me think about my role or my kind of personal engagement with subjects regarding architecture and other even arts and music in a personal way that is very much related to social movements and to bottom-up engagements. In the meanwhile, I've also, since I think 2012, I've been involved in this organization called Architects Without Borders, or Architecture Sans Frontières, but the Swedish organization with different roles. I've been sitting for a few years earlier in the board, and now I'm in the board again, and so it deals a lot with questions on many different levels, collaborative between different organizations and NGOs, but also in terms of giving project support and introducing the subjects of architecture in context where basically human rights is central into young architects and other people who want to engage. And I've along these years I've been meeting a lot of inspiring people from many different sectors, from academia, from as architects or professionally, but also and most importantly in civil society. So where I find most of my inspiration is a lot of different people that some most of them I know their names. A lot of people I don't, that pass by with the time and have created a very important impact on how I see the importance of engagement.
How do you mentioned like you mentioned human rights, or you are like that you're sometimes supporting, sometimes doing something like this. How do you, could you have like 2 examples or that somehow?
So I think that my the question about what I think is or architecture is a human right is what it pops up in my mind. The first is basically it depends a bit on what do we refer to as architecture. And I think it's a very relevant question to define architecture within this discussion, as we know that since postmodernism, the transformation of the subject of architecture has been quite much moving apart from certain movements that in the 60s and 70s, focusing on engagement and focusing on communities, focusing on empowerment. And I think that the current situation of architecture is kind of asking an engagement from different fronts constantly, and I think that's a very interesting spectrum. So I think that it depends a lot on how we see architecture. I think that architecture naturally is part of human life, and therefore it goes a bit beyond a human right in a sense. What I think is interesting is to be able to discuss architecture from a civil perspective as well. So civil architecture, and not being just the discussion about what is the stated and the status quo, but also the establishment of architecture from both academic and professional perspective. But there is a lot of inspiration that we can get from communities solving problems and finding solutions to things, which is what defines the history of our relationship to spatial organization, for instance. So in a way, it's part of human life. That's
and like your lunch, DJ lunch parties. Do you think that is there any like architectural story behind?
There is one connection. I mean, there is somehow a connection. Is that it came into my life in a moment where I felt that I really needed to engage myself in a lot of things that are you with me?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, in a lot of things that are voluntary based, that are necessarily kind of going on, focusing on people's joy for life and sharing that joy, and in a way, as a DJ, I became very tired of how the establishment of the DJ world was following for something that is just a profit situation, and therefore I very early quit from DJing clubs, and it was mainly engaging on informal parties, and therefore when it came to Lunch Beat idea, which is basically a free party on the street, on any public space for everyone to access, and with certain basic rules that it should be for free and all these things. So it's a completely voluntary engagement, and I usually state for people that I do this because I basically feel the joy of giving it back, or inspiring people and giving that energy and contributing for a better society in a sense.
You mentioned also this community engagement or civic architecture and like empowering communities. It's also a human right to have the access to communities. So I think it's interesting to mention, and I think architecture, this kind of basic architecture that many of us doing, it's really just scratching the surface of architecture, but not really going in deep understanding how many interesting parts and how many interesting issues do we have when we talk about architecture. And space and materials around us. So actually we are almost every minute in our life we are in an architectural space.
Yeah, and it's funny when you mentioned that. It comes to a reference that I was thinking to bring up here, that relationship with everyday life, in everyday life with space and spatial organization, is something that is an idea that was put in front of me in the first weeks of my education in architecture by a teacher that is a major reference for me that already passed away. Her name was Beatriz Madureira, and she put in front of me that idea of responsibility of whatever we design that becomes built as architecture is something that others will have to deal with and will have to accept and will have to tolerate, so that we should be fully aware and conscious that basically the crap that we make is something that others have to accept. And that is a responsibility that felt really heavy on the shoulders and made me always think and reflect upon when it comes to discussing why are we doing what we do as architects, right?
Yeah. What's her name again? Sorry, because
Beatriz Madureira.
Okay. Yes. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the questions I mentioned like something like freedom in architecture and equality in architecture. Maybe if you could refer somehow into this, maybe through your academic works, so this with students.
Yeah. So regarding my role as here at Chalmers, I'm currently ahead of one of the master programs in architecture. It's a master program called Architecture and Planning Beyond Sustainability. It focuses on the subjects of sustainability in relationship to architecture and has a very strong profile of connections to social aspects. And we have a few design studios that work a lot with that type of engagement. One of the design studios is called Reality Studio. It works in Kisumu, Kenya. The students are in collaboration with local universities there for a few weeks and investigate and work in close contact with local communities and in slum areas and other development contexts. And that is a very interesting collaboration and an interesting studio. And then there is another studio, which is the one I'm responsible for, which is called Social Inclusion, and it's a studio that works in the Swedish Million Home Program suburbs of Gothenburg. So the Million Home Program is a type of post-war housing that, in the case of Sweden, is type of areas highly populated with foreign background communities which have a very interesting and strongly inspiring cultural and I think I would call colorful and musical inspiration it has. It's at the same time, of course, or not of course, but it comes from the type of urban development that has had consequences on being areas with the different type of challenges and challenges that are both social and economical challenges in terms of development and in terms of rights of citizens. So I was talking about, so in our studio we work in this in close contact with these communities. So we have the studio is placed during a full study semester in that context. So we have the students now in the autumn working there constantly and in collaboration with the local communities, and has a focus on methods of co-creation and participation as a way of working for planners and architects in these areas. And we have done a lot of different type of, so we use a lot, this studio is pretty much like you could think of a kind of a guerrilla studio, or it's a studio where we do a lot of different type of experiments in terms of architectural practice and contacts with the communities, as we try to approach the projects always from a critical perspective, to a critical perspective of our profession, basically. And we work, and the projects can range from strategical planning, developing games for dialogue, as can be pretty much focused on building design and technology, but also going all the way to building and realizing these projects into concrete results.
Is it easy? How easy it is to develop such projects for 1 or 2 semesters, and how easy it is to make it like on a long run sustainable, or you are trying to make projects which can be really like implemented in a semester or in few months?
That's a very good question. That's the question that I'm always, I think it's the most interesting of all, is how to develop and how to start this project. We, in order to run this type of studio, obviously I have to be in constant contact with the community and with this context all year round, in order to line up the projects with the current development questions and development processes and ongoing projects, where we try to constantly meet both the community's perspective on things, and so a bottom-up perspective, but also to reach out for the top-down, for an opening for a dialogue with communities. So a lot of the projects have been well anchored in these major actors from both directions. And sometimes even the financing is a question where, for me, it's almost like a principle that the local organizations, such as housing companies or the municipality and other actors that have like a more top-down action in the planning process, that they have, with working with us, they have this opportunity to show a responsibility also, and show an engagement, right? So this the financing process for constructing and realizing a project is very much also a process of participation. In a way, you have to balance the different actors in over the projects. And it's a very hard work, as these communities are spread around in the suburbs of Gothenburg, and they are of different sizes and different morphological shapes and distribution, and the characteristics of these urban districts are very different from one to the other. So we need to access even the kind of the acknowledgement and the delving into the areas have to be done in a way that is always and constantly open for us to learn. So for me, I think the key kind of qualities that I have to think of to implement in here is to be able to listen and to be open for learning constantly, and learning from everything that is happening in these areas, and learning from people that are open to work with us, but also learning from people that are skeptical about our work, as there is a lot, because this skepticism and these positions are very important for us to learn more and about our own roles and architectural roles. But I think that what I try to always tell my students is that for them to work within this type of contexts, I think the most important is to think of ourselves first of all as citizens and humans, and only after being able to think of us as architects. That's I think the main my main idea of how to make social sustainability be something in connection to architecture in a way.
Great. The last two episodes were always with some books somehow. I think the first episode we tried to show some books, so I brought again a lot of books, and I don't know if you have some books with you.
I have a pile here.
Okay.
I picked from my shelf. I think that I have quite interesting books that are borrowed out to students, so I don't have them here.
Okay.
Two of them that I think are very important for how we approach the education of architecture in our master program and in our design studio is Architecture Depends from Jeremy Till.
I almost picked it from my shelf, but at the end I left it.
And a spatial agency also from Tatiana Schneider and others.
Okay. So maybe this is the winner of the day.
Exactly.
Then.
Yes.
Okay.
And I also picked this one because I found it funny that you also had it. And I think there are a few interesting. I found this one at the Biennale for some 2 years ago in Venice. I think it's a very interesting piece of studies of different cities. So it's called Ephemeral Urbanism, Cities in Constant Flux. And it's about cities transformed and temporary and in movement. So a few good examples about urban context developed in connection to refugee situations all over the world are here, and the way it's documented, the different cities, in order to compare them with different data and references. I think it's a really good way to structure this type of analysis. And then there is, I think this is a very good book for an introduction of Colin Ward. It's called Autonomy, Solidarity and Possibility. It's a Colin Ward reader. Colin Ward is a famous architect and activist and anarchist, so very much connected to architecture and anarchy, the right to housing in the 60s and 70s. In the movement when John F.C. Turner was also writing a lot about community building and housing by people or for people. I don't remember the exact name. I think this is also a very good book about architecture and forensics. It's this practice in connection to University of London Goldsmiths. It's a research group that works with forensics as a tool of analysis of as forensics within architectural analysis methodologies as a tool to support other forms of.
How can you translate it? How can you translate this book or the content of this book into your daily work or something like that?
I think this one has been a very good book for discussing with colleagues about how certain methodologies, digital methodologies, can be used for different purposes, not necessarily just figuring out how nice it looks, the final image of our project on the poster, as it can be tools that can be twisted and used for different type of analysis that to reach to questions that we otherwise use always the same methods. And I think that it's very interesting to listen to their presentations also about the processes of inquiry that they use, and they are very similar to the process of architectural design. So that's why I think it's a very interesting book. And then I have I don't know if there is enough time for all these books, but these are three numbers of the magazine, volume 2 about architecture of peace, and this one about it's a self-building city with a lot of good examples of projects. I think if we have students listening, I think this is interesting. Also, this AD magazine, the Architectural Design on Scarcity, edited by Jeremy Till. I think it's also a very good one. about architecture in the age of depleting resources. And also, then finally, the last magazine, so these are magazines, is the Art Plus 211, 212 number about Think Global, Build Social. And here I think it's a very interesting how this magazine is structured in a way that is similar to a book publication where there is examples of projects, but then the middle parts are extremely theoretical with good theoretical references also. So I think it's a very good example of a magazine. Yeah.
I think it's a good last small topic about practice and theory. And as I see, when we talk about human rights, I think in theory it's functioning very well, but in reality, it's kind of still a lot of people suffering, and still a lot of people have no access to the basic human rights. So, what would you say? How could we transform our great theoretical knowledge about architecture and human rights into real, practical usage?
I think that a lot of it has to do with transdisciplinarity and how we architects are able to work with new disciplines constantly and from different fields, and to collaborate with people from different fields. And when it comes to human rights, and in the fields of development or of crisis, assessing crisis situations, I think it's a situation where we need to be really able to learn from all those interactions with other professionals and other fields.
So what are these professionals? So who are we looking for?
It goes from doctors, so it goes from builders, from the old building industry, so engineers, but I think also social workers and people working on the field of social support, and also people that kind of volunteer for emergency support and the field and the first actions that often not necessarily have a specific professional profile. But I think it's interesting to look at how those collaborations can make us learn about new things about our own profession. When we in how we work, I think it's interesting to when I track back where our students from our master program work today. I think it's interesting and it's very inspiring for me personally to see that they don't necessarily work in major architectural firms doing the traditional architectural jobs, but they also try to take on positions and roles as to be leaders of sustainability in those firms or in other firms, and sometimes in consultancy firms that have nothing to do with architecture necessarily, but they dare to go into roles that are of leadership to what it is to understand our profession from different angles. And many of those roles are also related to municipality and public agencies and things like that. And I think that is interesting, is to see how that kind of how our students actually search for that type of professional output and engagement, and it's a way to also challenge the profession and to challenge the establishment, so offices and firms, and how they engage or how they pick their projects, how they choose their panels of discussions, representation-wise, how they engage with the communities, how do they really care for who has the needs, and how they enforce with certain projects that have a political impact, as architecture is also political, necessarily. And that's where I think it's interesting is that in practice it actually has an impact. It's an invisible impact sometimes, but it is important to acknowledge.
Super, Emilio. Thanks a lot. I don't know if you have anything else to say in the last few seconds.
I don't know. I think it's to enjoy architecture and dance is together is for me a way to break down my own boundaries. So I think that to be able to discuss human rights in architecture, we need to be able to discuss the boundaries, and the boundaries of even the human rights, as you mentioned in your first session, about certain rights. One can think of like this right to property you mentioned, as one can think. I mean, we need to analyze these things and be critical beyond what is stating there. So use different forms of breaking your personal boundaries. I think it's what is it's fun to do.
As I've seen in the DJ videos about this kind of launch parties, people are really like getting rid of their boundaries, and they just start enjoying and taking care about happiness and community and enjoying.
It's very interesting. It's a movement. So Lunchbeat is a movement that started in Stockholm for about 8 years ago, and it spread all over the world. We were the second city, and we are the longest running. So everywhere else it shut down, as there was a very short maybe possibilities and so on. But we have just continued because we created a cult around it in a way, and we have this like usual the group that is strong and following, and people like really have like they dress out their prejudices, their ways of dealing with each other. They come to a place of sharing, a place of joy, a place of loving each other, and so they dance freely, and there is no analysis or prejudice or things like that. It's just a common joy, and it has a powerful impact on people. We have seen how they then report how inspirational and how full of energy they come back to work in the afternoon, and how I've done one of these sessions for a research project that was about how creativity improves after you dance, and it was an analysis of 400 kids that were dancing, and then they made tests of some creative tests of responding to questions and so on, and their creativity and in their type of response almost doubled. It was really amazing, as I was not aware that it could be that simple, but we made that there, and it really worked.
Nice, super. Thanks a lot, Emilio, and hopefully see you soon. You have, I think, a lot of stories